Hi, everyone. Before we get along with everything, we just wanted to do a quick land acknowledgement as we are on land that was not originally ours. We recognize that many indigenous nations have long standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses and recreational facilities are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many indigenous nations. The area known as Tekaronto has been taken care of by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share the land and care for the Great Lakes region. York University. Please enjoy. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Women's Sports Talk. We are your hosts, Alessia and Zach. And what will we be talking about today, Zach?
Okay, well, this is a very interesting thing as it's fairly recent. So you know the March Madness tournament, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the women's side had a ton of issues this year. So stemming from all these issues, we're going to be talking about some of the possible sexism in sport, right? So starting with what happened in the actual tournament, it's been reported on March 18th, the Stanford sports performance coach, Ali Kirshner, provided photos of what the San Antonio, which is where the women's tournament is, weight room compared to the men's. The women's was yoga mats and a single rack of dumbbells.
Wow.
The men's was like a full gym, pretty much. It had tons of squat racks, just tons of stuff. Of squat racks, benches, all of it. Then it went on with the NCAA coming out with a statement, damage control, that it was an issue of space constraint. But then an Oregon State player at the women's tournament did a TikTok revealing that it wasn't an issue, as there was a ton of area that had been roped off that they could have used for extra space, but they weren't.
Wow.
That included practice pad, everything. So, the U.S. Congress ended up writing an open letter to the NCAA recently, giving them till last week, a little over last week, April 2nd, to provide proof of an active investigation as to why the two clear Title IX violations happened, and prove that they weren't aware of these issues beforehand.
Wow. And did you notice any issues between the discrepancies?
Yes, a lot of them. So besides the weight room fiasco and the area that's been kind of carted off, the NC2A also has been reported by the Washington Post that the meal quality was very different. One was more of a buffet. The other one was like your hungry man take home dinner.
Wow.
Yeah, the men had the buffet.
Of course.
Yeah. They also withheld that trademark, very, very investor heavy March Madness slogan and name from the female tournament.
Wow.
Let's be honest here. What investor is going to invest in something that they can't see the name on, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was also reported by the USA Today that there was no childcare support, primarily affecting the women's coaches, but the NC2A didn't compensate child support. They also did not exempt young children from the travel party for each team, which consists of 34. So if on that staff, which includes trainers, coaches, players, school representatives, if any of them had a young child that had to come, that child counted against that 34-person cap. There was also a difference in testing for COVID-19, where the women had the antigen tests, which have been proven to be less effective than the PCR tests, where the men had the rapid response PCR testing. And on top of that, although this could be more due to sponsorship issues, which are, somewhat out of NC2A's hands, the women had a massive difference in what tournament swag they got. Shirts, hats, all that stuff. It was about half of what the men's teams got, even though they claimed it was the same financial value.
Thank you for that insight, Zach.
All right, so in the wake of all this NC2A complete shenanigans and, everything, it definitely shows like some sexism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think a really good question is, where can we relate other aspects of sexism?
Right.
Whether it's, direct sexism like women shouldn't belong in sport, to even going to queer theory and how our sexuality is represented. And it's actually a really good thing. I found a article, and it is actually breaking down 2 sports movies based around women in sport and just kind of how we see things. The first movie is Bend It Like Beckham, fairly famous movie, soccer movie, football. I'll call it football because more fun. So the general synopsis of this movie is that 2 women are on the same team. They both fall for the coach. Ends up becoming a Hallmark love story.
Right.
I hate the Hallmark Channel. But what this author of this paper argued was that, well, in this lens, it was enforcing heteronormativity. Words. And it also portrayed homosexuality through negative lights. And Bend It Like Beckham really, really hit home. I have seen this movie. It really hit home. So the paper begins, explaining intersectionality between sport, media, how things are portrayed, right? But then it goes into this push that in the movie the women have to be straight by their families. The one is a British Asian, believe that she's from India, or her family at least, and they're very traditional. But the mother throughout the movie shows homophobia to extreme extents. Her teammate on her soccer team, after being seen hugging, embracing, doing that European like kiss greeting thing, I never understood it. To each their own. She flat out screams at this woman, "Get your lesbian feet out of my shoes at a wedding."
Wow.
Not even together with her daughter.
Right.
So we can definitely see the homophobia there.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much the heteronormativity, but we can see the homophobia for sure. It's also extended when some of the relatives thought that lesbian was a place.
Oh no.
I've never heard of a country called lesbian. Yeah, then it's more extended throughout this movie though. It's this mother. I don't remember how old the athletes were, but it is definitely abuse.
Yeah.
At least emotional abuse. And it's his mother just pointing out physical attributes that she had, her daughter has. Her daughter's breasts, her daughter's butt, just being like, "Oh yeah, a man would love those."
Oh no.
But then also pointing out like that for guys, like kind of gross.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then the author actually references Judith Butler, ironically from the same paper that we had. And the quote that I picked out of this is the persistence of this subplot serves to rectify heterosexuality and fits with Butler's arguments that heterosexuality is in fact fragile and in need of constant discursive bolstering from bodies that matter on discursive limits of sex. And I think that it's a fairly accurate statement. Like, this mother is so distraught that she thinks her daughter's lesbian. Like, she's going out of her way. I don't know. What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, no, I could agree. It obviously shouldn't be a battle to express your sexual orientation, and it shouldn't be glorified either, to be straight and to not be anything else. It should be, but because of the way that our society is, we normalize that everyone should be straight. So when there is cases, even in sport, when people are signaled out for being anything other than straight, it becomes a problem and it becomes sexualized.
Yeah, just look at that. I believe that he was an NFL player that came out in the NFL, was immediately within a week cut from his teams, came to the CFL, and then the focus wasn't on his playing ability with the Montreal Alouettes. It was the fact that he was gay.
Exactly.
Honestly, who cares? Like, one of the major critiques this author writes about, the families and the family's portrayal, is that the clear just not understanding that sexuality and gender, they're not based around environmental factors completely. Obviously, there's some, just as there is with everything else in life.
Right.
But it's, a genetic thing. Like, some of the mindsets of these people were like, the one family is, it'll make my daughter straight through contact with male athletes.
Yeah.
Just saying here, messed up as all hell. The other one is concerned, though, that through playing soccer with female athletes, she'll become lesbian, or at the very least bisexual. I'm bisexual. I've played soccer since I was 8. I've played hockey since I was 6 or 7. I've never once gone to a rink or gone to the field and been like, hey, I'm going to sleep with my teammate today.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not how that works.
It's not a causation that because you are bisexual or straight or whatever, it's because of the sport you play. There shouldn't be that connection at all. It's the people who they are, you're born this way, and that's it. Whatever you want to do in life has there's no correlation to whether or not your gender or sexuality affects it.
Exactly. Then we get into the second movie, which is Girl Fight, which I will admit I haven't seen it. I've seen clips here and there with you before.
Right.
So I didn't write down my main notes about it, just since I can't put a somewhat impartial view on it. But the main thing that the article really points out is that it's more so challenging the gender norms. This is a young Latina or Hispanic, depending on what the understanding of this lady is. Some argue that she's from South America, others Central, and it's but she's a boxer. She's a boxer. Everything that she's doing is she's training boxing. She's training to fight. And it's really pushing that, like, hey, this is a male dominated sport. This is a sport where, aggression, ruthlessness, these things are associated. The men are being portrayed by a woman. and she's succeeding. She beats who eventually ends up her Hallmark Love Channel relation. Like, she beats the odds as a woman who's, traditionally characterized as a feminine, like, you think Latina athlete, dancer, gymnast. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. I do have a critique though, because it got very, very frustrating for me. There came a paragraph where the author was critiquing, lack of LGBTQ members, again, reinforcing heteronormativity in the world, which isn't true. But immediately after that, she goes and calls the main character a butch.
Of course.
Yeah, that heavily associated term to homosexuality. Like,
yeah,
to me, it kind of defeats the purpose. If you're going to argue for one, you can't just go and randomly label someone who clearly isn't as that. So, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on it?
well, yeah, like it's obviously assumed that whenever women are more muscular than other women, like it's not really a norm for women to be as muscular the same way that men are. So once you see a woman that does portray these traits, it's automatically assumed that, oh, they must be a dyke or they must be a butch. But it's not, it shouldn't be labeled. It shouldn't have to have a label. It can just be women can look however they like, and it shouldn't have to affect their sexual orientation, or shouldn't be labeled as butch or anything like that. And even with the author saying that there's not enough LGBTQ, it shouldn't, they shouldn't have the result of being called a butch. Like there just shouldn't, that shouldn't have happened.
100%. Like, that medal that I have hanging up, that is from our, university's very successful women's hockey team.
Mm-hmm.
I can think of 5 people on that team. Notice people, that they're lesbians, and none of them fit that, like, traditional kind of, like, when you think female lesbian athlete, like, built that Megan Rapinoe, that built short hair, that,
Right.
yeah, like, none of them fit that. So to even think that, just because they're not normal females, as sarcastically as I can say that, that they're, LGBT or whatever, that's just, it's disgusting, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
While it is important to draw from personal experiences that athletes face today in the wake of gender appropriation, sexism, and gender role stereotypes, we would like to propose a research question. Will male study participants' self-reported levels of arousal correlate to the physiological levels of arousal generated during the viewing of women's sports clips? And vice versa as well. Will female study participants' self-reported levels of arousal correlate to the physiological levels of arousal generated during the viewing of men's sports clips?
So, getting away from some of the quite obvious cases of, excuse me, homophobia, gender norms, and that, I did find an article from 2008 titled "Television, Sports, and Athlete Sex: Looking at the Differences in Watching Male and Female Athletes" by Dr. James Aglini. Pretty much all that this article does is it discusses the sexualization of sport. So, again, this does play into gender normativity, but it also touches on a topic that is known as hegemonic masculinity. For those that don't know, this is pretty much the concept that there's male superiority. really not good. And to support it, um, they define both masculine traits and feminine traits. While discussing gender schema theory, also known as hegemonic masculinity, and gender norms. Pretty much all that it's talking about is that there are specific roles for each gender, and that males are perceived as the quote unquote superior. Looking at what they define as the traits for masculinity includes strength, self control, aggression, stamina, discipline, fearlessness, and competitiveness. Feminine traits are defined as beauty, passivity, grace, emotion, and expressiveness. So we can already see some gender normatives in just the assigned traits, but it goes on a little bit to explain also the media and its influence. It is quoted, television has the potential to assist in the forming and reinforcing of gender schema that incorporate stereotyped ideas about gender roles, possibly through implicit learning. Implicit learning, that whole notion of you see it, you hear it, the monkey do, you see it, you see it, you hear it, you say it, you do it. Monkey see, monkey do. Another quote from it is televised women's sports tend to focus on athletes who participate individually and not with the team. So you're looking at gymnastics, swimming, or not volleyball so much, tennis, golf, those things. As well as on sports that stress the charisma and grace of an athlete. Again, you're looking figure skating, gymnastics, those types of things. These are also the women's sports that tend to receive the most airtime. Fair point. Look how much airtime that we get between figure skating and ice hockey. Due to their focus on beauty, again, figure skating, ice hockey. Right time as Tessa Virtue, Canadian Olympic figure skater, comes up. Again, due to the focus on beauty and the overall attractiveness of the participant, as well as the sport itself. Again, we're seeing this connection between this beauty and sport. We're seeing this notion that women's sports are about the beauty. As we see right now, Order of Canada Award given to Christine St. Clair. Attractive woman, not in a traditionally beautiful sport. She's a soccer player, a footballer. Hayley Wickenheiser, Canadian Olympian, in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Again, hockey not deemed a beauty sport. Some more quotes are, the media is considered one of these structures that, through their stereotypical portrayals of women, reinforce these patriarchal beliefs in society, which is completely true. You don't air women in sport. Well, airing men, you'll see people believe, oh, women's sports are lesser, women aren't as good, etc. In contrast to female athletes, male athletes are believed to have personality characteristics not appropriate for women. These characteristics include aggressiveness, competitive spirit, discipline, and stamina. Again, here you're seeing this connection between men being assertive, being aggressive, being masculine, that isn't shown in females. That's what this connection between gender normativity and hegemonic masculinity is. That's where, if we're looking at things interconnectedly, that is where it is. We're seeing the big picture. We're seeing women in sport portrayed as they're pretty much for eye candy, while men are there as these big, strong warrior or people, and we're seeing then where sexism's occurring. They're occurring right where sport and women collide with where men and sport are. It's also stated, and for whatever reason, people are believing this, that this notion of women not being aggressive, not being competitive, that it's not there. It's being taught in schools, for God's sake. Like, Alessia, I don't know about you, but I heard it all throughout my school that women are, girls specifically, are not as strong athletes, or men are better athletes, boys are better athletes. That type of BS, absolute bullshit.
Yeah, Zach, I can actually completely agree with your statement here. I actually had someone from my high school who, she had a lot of interest in playing on a hockey team. And because she was a woman, though, we actually didn't have enough females that wanted to start a hockey team. So she petitioned to join the men's hockey team, to try out for the men's hockey team. And what ended up happening was a lot of the guys kind of teased her and made fun of her pretty much for thinking that she could be as good as them, if not better. And fast forward to the end of the year, she was actually awarded um, the MVP of the team, and she was the starting goalie for the men's lineup for the hockey team. So it's honestly, it's so controversial to just assume that um, men are always going to be better than women, because there are so many things like this situation here that it proves that women can be as good as men, if not better.
That in itself is also a form of interconnectivity, and that's between both the gender normative and education, but also education and hegemonic masculinity. They acknowledge it in this paper, but instead of calling it interconnectivity, such as the writer Kimberly Crenshaw uh, puts it, generally in terms of race and racism, but it spans outwards as always. But they call it the social dominance orientation, which is defined as the likelihood of going along with a social hierarchy. That is the simplest definition of it. We can equate it to hegemonic masculinity through the interconnectivity of gender normatives and education. As education is providing the social, reinforcing the ideals of hegemonic masculinity in our society through their portrayal of gender norms. So what happened in this paper is pretty much they went and he did a self-assessment and physiological test. It was pretty interesting. They had 6 hypotheses. 4 of them don't really matter nearly as much, as they're just relating to physiological aspects of things and are more supporting data. Excuse me. What really matters is the first 2 hypotheses. The first one, male study participants will self-report higher levels of arousal for men's sports than for women's sports. They're talking physical arousal, not necessarily sexual. And the second one is the opposite. Female study participants will report higher levels of arousal for women's sports than for men's sports. And it's paired with the 2 research questions. Will male study participants' self-reported levels of arousal correlate to physiological levels of arousal generated during the viewing of women's sports clips? Will female study participants' self-reported values or levels of arousal correlate to the physiological levels of arousal generated during the viewing of men's sports clips. The really interesting thing about this study happened, though, the results indicated that the physiological effects were pretty much identical. Males were pretty much aroused the same as females were for both, with, obviously some variation. But the self-reported arousals did not match the physiological ones, which is really, really interesting, as it shows cognitive bias in here. What happened was, and it showed more in male sports, but males were reporting a much higher level of arousal for male sports than females. Females were doing the same, but to a much greater degree of men. What happened, though, was female sports in both categories had better cognitive tests following the experiment. They had higher levels of recognition when asked questions about the sport, and generally they had better retention of the activities in the sports for the female athletes. Again, what this is indicating to us is that there is interconnectivity between, one, education and media. We're putting these ideas of male dominance in sports into children's heads, into youth's heads, and then reinforcing it through things like we're not airing nearly as many women's sports, or being very selective in what sports they're aired, or even at what times. Great example, you can see, look at women's NBA. The last time I think I saw a game, it was at like 4 in the afternoon. Well, if you're going to go off ratings, no one's going to watch it. People are at work. Children might watch it, but they're just getting home from school. So, again, by not putting these women in time slots where they can even be seen, you're reinforcing this male dominance, that men are more deserving of these spots in the prime time airing channels.
The theory of woman being chose second can also be portrayed through the reading by Judith Butler, Subjects of Sex, Gender Desire in Gender Trouble, Feminism, and Subversion of Identity. In part 4, she says that theorizing the binary, the unary, and beyond, Butler goes back to the idea that by trying to insist upon the unity and universality of the subject of woman, we in turn exclude the political, cultural, and social ways that many women are identified by as well. We can see these social ways in which women cannot be portrayed the way that they want to be portrayed. In sport, women are not given the opportunity, the same opportunity that men are given. And as men identify themselves based on their sport, women should be able to do the same and have the same recognition and the same opportunities that men have in the social world of how genders exist. Relative to Butler's argument, I actually was able to find a good example of this idea where two biological determined sexes, male and female, are just not enough. Because this is a part of society's traditional discourse around identity, beings in society take for granted that it is true, natural, and inevitable that one can be either male or female. These beings therefore experience themselves and others as either male or female. In Gender Trouble, Butler claims that many of our society's basic assumptions, such as male or female binary, are not natural fact, but are rather discursively constituted. Couldn't the same be said for the way our society has normalized men's sports overpopulating women's sports? Society's traditional discourse is taking big events such as the Super Bowl or even the Stanley Cup and normalizing the representation of men in these tournaments instead of women. Before I move on to share the personal experiences that female athletes have experienced all around the world through the documentary of Annette Negessa, How the IAAF Fails to Ensure Human Rights, I would like to share a quote from Fausto-Sterling, The Five Sexes, Why Male and Females Are Not Enough. But what if things were altogether different? Imagine a world in which the same knowledge that has enabled medicine to intervene in the management of intersexual patients has been placed at the surface of multiple sexualities. Imagine that the sexes have multiplied beyond currently imaginable limits. It would have to be a world of shared power. Patient and physician, parent and child, male and female, heterosexual and homosexual, all those oppositions and others would have to be dissolved as sources of division. Relative to the issue on how females should be represented in sport, a documentary labeled Annette Negessa, How the IAAF Fails to Ensure Human Rights is a story about medical interventions on athletes that have essentially destroyed their lives. The main plot of the documentary circles around female athletes in the track and field sports. So, runners, 800 meters, 2,000 meters, that sort, and how they have been tested for high levels of testosterone. But the problem here is how the IAAF approaches this and how this affects the athletes in the long term of their career. Most of the athletes that are mentioned in this documentary, such as Caster Semenya or Pratama, who was an Indian elite athlete in India, these women were forced to leave their races, leave their competitions if they didn't seek medical attention. But the problem with the medical options that were available was so extreme and so effective that it would affect their lives forever. The documentary starts off by mentioning Pratama, who is the elite Indian runner. She was one of India's fastest runners. At the age of 18, she won a silver at the Asian Junior Championships. Shortly afterwards, her federation requested that she undergo a gender test, and this took a really traumatic toll on her. She was really frightened that her secret would become public news, and it was something that she struggled with her entire life. And actually, after some time, when she refused to take the test, she was so in fear of this news becoming public that she unfortunately committed suicide. Another runner that I mentioned previously was Caster Semenya. She was known as the fastest 800-meter run in the world for females. And in 2009, Semenya had to undergo a gender test as well. Breaking all customs, the intimate findings were spread publicly. She has been accused of lying about her gender. Many athletes competing against her actually complained that someone of intersex nature should not be competing with genetically born women. The IAAF introduced a testosterone limit where female middle distance runners who produce too much of the hormone must reduce their testosterone levels if they want to continue competing in women's races. However, this can only be done through hormone treatment or surgery, which either choice would be a long-term effect. Although this did not let Semenya destroy her career, she actually decided in protesting publicly and that she didn't want to change her body and that she takes her case to the CAS, the Sports arbitration court and takes legal actions against the federation. Now, although she loses this battle, this is an eye-opening moment for the IAAF regulations and to really put in place where they lie and how they're treating their own athletes. This has allowed the public to see a whole new world of the sports industry and how these women are treated compared to men. You know, you never hear things of men being too high in testosterone and being forced to leave race. It's always women's problems that affect their careers. Just to show you the true heartbreak that Annette Nagesa actually went through, who is the Ugandan runner, in hope of winning the London 2012 Olympic Games, her running career was able to support her entire family, providing food, shelter, and a stable income. For 7 years, she remained silent about this entire situation. But in 2011, she won the African Games, Ugandan Athlete of the Year, similar to Semenya in South Africa. And once she was able to secure a spot in the 2012 London Olympics, she received a phone call in which they withdrew her from the competition because of her high measures of testosterone. So I'm just going to show a clip of Annette basically explaining how this has affected her and the trials that she had to go through in order to get herself back on the map and continue her career in sports. So, because the documentary is in another language, I found a clip outside of the main source. It's just a YouTube clip and it basically explains what Annette essentially went through.
South Korea was my first World Championship. I was very, very happy to go on with the sport and going to another level. Preparing for London Olympics, me plus my coach, we were working very hard so that our dreams comes true. Yeah, because our dream was to reach the finals. As long as we reach to the finals, yeah, anything can happen there. Some few weeks to the departure for the London Olympics, that's the time when I received a call from my international manager telling me my blood samples, they're having some problem, technical problem, and you can't go for the competition. My local officials from my federation told me that you have to stay home, not moving. Yeah. And if anyone asks you, tell them that you have an injury whereby I was a person who is injury free. However, you know I wasn't sick. One official from the IAAF, he tried to reach me, and after some few weeks, I think, they had me travel to go to Nice for body checkup, like measuring my whole body and putting me into machine, yeah, just like scanning me, the whole body, and getting more other blood samples from me. Yeah, it was something which was really confused, like as if there were people who are not talking straight to you, telling you that this and this like this, yeah, but just telling you, do this, do this, do this, yeah. Went to a doctor with an executive from the federation because she was with me, escorting me, going to the hospital. They took me to the operation room, and they said that they are going to use the injection thing, whereby waking up, finding myself I'm having cuts. I say, oh, they've done something which we didn't agree on. Yeah.
Now that we've had a good insight on how the women in sport are truly treated by either the federation or just by supporters around them, we can kind of narrow down solutions on how we can better our society and how we treat women in sport. Just to circle back to the initial point of view, how women don't entirely get the same pay or even the same TV time that men get. One of the most well known and ongoing debates, even today in 2021, are the salaries of the WNBA and their NBA counterparts. It is known that most professional women basketball players, in order to make a sustainable income playing basketball, need to compete in numerous different national leagues. This creates an extreme physical demand on the athletes by not having an off season, as they are playing in Europe, Russia, China, and even Australia to make ends meet. Just to expand on the issues of salaries and payroll for women in sport, I have a few facts here that will put into perspective what the numbers look like for these women that are struggling. The Women's Sports Foundation reported that the NBA pays its players 49 to 51% of the league's revenue, while WNBA players take home a maximum of 22.8%. The equity in these sports come from percentage matching, not dollar, as without the players, the NBA wouldn't be able to generate the revenue that it does. Another interesting stat is in 2015, the Women's World Cup soccer final was the most watched soccer match, men's or women's, ever in the US, with nearly 25.4 million viewers. Yet, the players were far less compensated than their male counterparts. Then, if we look again at the 2019 final, the women achieve a 22% higher viewership than the 2018 Men's World Cup final, and the same was compensated more for male counterparts. It is important to not only look at the percentages and the salary incomes for these players, but also the media revenue and the broadcasting rights and everything that goes into how they get their audience and their attention on them. Interestingly enough, female athletes are using the profile raising opportunities socials present to their advantage. Social media offers female athletes an opportunity to amplify their voices and grow their presence. They are the newest form of social media influencers. So, an example of this is Ramla Ali, a Somali born female boxer and Nike sponsored athlete who shares her struggles in a male dominated sport and is sparking inspiration amongst everyone. Unfortunately, though, when it comes to raising their profile on social female athletes, they will often be subjected to online abuse. One study found that female athletes face 3 times more abuse than men. Analysis of social media commentary found that nearly 27% of comments on Facebook posts were negative towards sportswomen compared to 8% of male athletes. Of those negative comments, 23% were sexist and 20% belittled their sporting abilities. Alongside this, 14% were highly sexualized and explicit. Another interesting finding is a recent survey actually completed by Join the Dolts Insights Consulting found that Twitter activity was considered an important profile raising tool in the world of women's football. It was felt that Twitter activity provided the opportunity for women's teams and women's football in general to broaden its fan base. It also found that even just simple retweeting can have a huge impact on players, clubs, and game visibility at grassroots level. So now the question is, how can we change these statistics for the better? And it's important to ensure that you and those around you are educated on what equal pay actually means. Equal pay means equal pay for the same amount of work under the same boss. The fight is asking for female and male athletes within the same level of teams who have the same basic workload, responsibilities, and amount of matches be paid the same basic wage by their sports governing body. What it boils down to is that we all collectively, men and women, need to do more about gender equality. We need to pave the way for the next generation of girls and women just as we do for boys and men. There should be no disparity in sports, in the workplace, or in life. all athletes should be seen as and treated as equals in all respects. Gender should not be the thing that defines us or separates us from all our fellow athletes. Just to conclude in the solutionary section of the podcast, I was actually able to find some organizations to help women succeed in the sports industry. So the first one is called Women's Sport International, and it is a global organization. It was established in 1994 with the aim of making sports and physical activity a priority in the lives of women to encourage positive change and develop opportunities. Women's Sport International is primarily an advocacy organization which strives to increase the opportunities of women in the world of sports and encourage their involvement through the establishment of global partnerships and synergies. And the second organization is known as Women's Sports Foundation. They are a US based organization founded in 1974 by the famous tennis legend Billie Jean King with the aim of advancing the lives of women and girls through sports and physical activity. Today, the organization strives to empower women and girls by giving them the opportunity to participate in sport, allowing them to unfold their leadership potential. Currently, Women's Sports Foundation focuses on financially supporting high school girls as well as women in college students in advancing their aspirations of becoming sports professionals.
So, based on the issues that we have discussed today, what can you say as a take-home message?
Honestly, like we discuss everything kind of in depth, or at least we try to, right? Gender normativity, homophobia, going into just issues in general with women's sport. What we really need to do, though, and it's more than just this. It's also in terms of race and racism and all that. Just be conscious, like really, be conscious. Look at the interconnectivity of things, whether it's a sporting event being somehow relating to displacement of natives. Like we need to actually take a step back, look at the whole picture. Kind of on happier news, since we've been kind of bleak as shit. The NWHL, they've done amazing the last 2 years. In just growing women's hockey. 2019, they ended up having a total of almost 1 million viewers on Twitch. Like that's with barely any marketing, anything. Average 70,000 viewers per game. There are NHL teams that can't do that.
Right.
Most of them can't.
Wow, that sounds great.
Like, that's amazing. This year was even better. In 2 less games, they ended up doing about the same amount of views, but again, it was in 2 less games total. Well, and that's with a giant gap in between because of their modified bubble failing, and then doing their Isabella Cup playoffs. Like that is amazing.
Yeah, for sure. So, based on these findings, we can obviously see that there is an improvement that we're getting from protesting and advocating for women in sport. However, the battle is never over. We are always trying to make it better for women and to really educate our viewers on why this is important. So that's actually all the time that we have for today. I am your host, Alessia, and this is our co host, Zach. And thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode of Women's Sports Talk. And we'll see you next week with another episode. Bye, guys.
Bye.